So we're back from our big trip to Bristol. Our first big trip in our second-hand Nissan Leaf. 280 miles-ish each way in the winter with average temperatures at about 2 or 3 degrees C. I guess with the heating on for most of the journey and driving at motorway speeds. Not the most efficient. But we used public charge points whilst we're out and about. So, how did we get on? Was it all smooth sailing? And what did we learn? Here's a video about our life living with a second-hand electric vehicle. So let's spend some time getting into the detail. So we recently bought this second-hand 4-year-old Nissan Leaf E+, which is supposed to have a 62 kilowatt-hour battery. Apparently 59 kilowatt-hours is usable. When we bought it, the car came with a battery report that said it had 93% of its original capacity. Overall, this means that we have around 55 kilowatt hours of battery capacity to get us round. And that, in winter, should give us between 165 and 195 miles of range, depending on how we're driving. That should get us to the 270, 280 miles that we needed to get to our friend's house in Bristol with one stop rapid charger. Should. So how did we get on? Well, we set off after work with a full battery, reporting 230 miles of range, and I was very conscious, that this was not likely to be accurate. Driving at winter at motorway speeds is not going to be the most efficient. So we plotted out a stop for some food, some dinner, and a charge at the grid surf chargers at Trowel Services, about 140 miles away, just under halfway into our journey. We arrived at Trowel with 12% battery left, or what the computer thought would be 29 miles of range. The car said that we'd driven at 3.4 miles per kilowatt hour, so we must have therefore used just over 40 kilowatt hours, which I feel like it's a bit confusing because that would mean that 100% charge is only 45 kilowatt hours and would get us only 153 miles in total, or 166 miles if you trust what the car said was left. So, first lesson learned of a long journey with our new car was I'm not sure how much we can trust the range in front of us, particularly on a motorway in winter. But using the grid surf charger with contactless payment was simple and quick to get hooked up. There was only one CHAdeMO connection, so the way that a Nissan Leaf charges a rapid charger, but there was no queue to use it. It was fairly late at night, but I can imagine the frustration if we'd have had to wait for that charger. So plugged into the services for a KFC dinner, taking our books with us to entertain us briefly whilst we waited. And actually we ended up staying maybe a bit longer than I thought we would, 57 minutes. And in that time, the chargers delivered 37 kilowatt hours, adding 70% on the car's computer at an average rate of 39 kilowatts, which is a bit lower than the 50 kilowatts the charger could supply up to, and a bit longer than we'd planned to spend. But adding 70% charge for 37 kilowatt hours would suggest the battery had a 53 kilowatt hour capacity and a range of around 180 miles. Again, a bit confusing. But this amount of charge cost us just under 30 quid, £29.60. And this, let's admit, is pretty expensive. And I guess I should point out that petrol, filling up with petrol at motorway services is expensive too. But 79 pence per kilowatt hour at the grid surf motorway chargers is much more than most of the charging I would do at home or at work. So from Trowel, we then carried on to our pal's house at Bristol. By the end, we had some 60 mile an hour driving to try and extend the range, but we arrived with 15 miles left, and apparently with 5% charge remaining. The onboard computer suggested we'd end up driving with an efficiency of 3.5 miles per kilowatt hours on the way down. And I must admit, I'm a little bit skeptical about that, and we'll try and go into that detail a bit more later. But we did make it okay. We made it maybe a bit later than planned, and we made it with some lessons learnt about our new car. But generally, we made it happy with the experience. The next morning I drove 5 minutes to the local Lidl and charged back to full on a 50 kilowatt CHAdeMO charger. And that charger delivered 49 kilowatt hours at a cost of £36.33 and should have been plenty to get us back up the road the next day. Someone else was actually waiting to use the charger when I arrived, so maybe that wasn't the best etiquette for me to leave it for a full hour or so. Sorry, Bristol Renault Zoe driver. Bad form from me. We set back off north on the Sunday afternoon. The weather was still pretty cold, but this time we had a bit of a headwind to drive into. We planned to stop at Gloucester Services for a coffee and a snack, mainly because it's a premium service station. I don't know if you've ever been, it is a dream, but a bit of a CHAdeMO disaster. The only socket that we could use was unavailable. We stopped for a coffee, but we didn't get to charge at all. And even if we'd got just 15 minutes to charge at 50 kilowatts, that would have helped fill us up that little bit and allowed us to hit the road again really efficiently. And my hope was that a stop at Gloucester and a meander around the shop would mean that we'd have enough charge to get us up to Yorkshire to Wetherby services. Instead, we were back on the road with a slightly lower than planned range. Esther, my wife, drove the next leg whilst I made a plan on ZapMap for where we could stop. And unfortunately, the lofty heights of Gloucester services are not repeated up the M42 and the M1. So, Trowell, our halfway point-ish, seemed to be the right place. So we recreated our southbound trip and at the northbound charges. There was no queue for the CHAdeMO connection this time, and we decided to stop for a shortish time to give us enough charge to get us up to Wetherby. So a loose stop and 20 minutes reading our books, and we were back on the road again. Again, using the GridServe chargers, plugging in was simple and efficient. I think Esther at this stage was a little bit annoyed experiencing the wait to get some extra juice. And she kept on saying, it's just a bit of a change of mindset. And I think it probably is for both of us. The weather and particularly the wind wasn't great for motorway driving, but we made it up to Wetherby, again, hopefully for a short stop. And what did we find at Wetherby? 7 CHAdeMO points, all working and all free to use, and some of them rated at 100 kilowatts. Maybe this was a chance for a bit of a splash and dash. I've got the feeling that I'm probably going to be really excited whenever I use a slightly different charger or have a slightly different experience of charging out and about, and this was no different. At this time, I had downloaded the GridServe app and started to charge using the app rather than just paying contactless. The app gave us a little bit more information when we were in the service station about what was happening with the car and ultimately where we were up to, where it had charged to over that time. And I guess the bit I was most interested in is it gave us live data as to how much power the charger was providing. When I saw the 58 kilowatts jump up near the start, I was really excited, and this would mean that we could charge pretty quickly and time spent inside would be minimal. Unfortunately, that rate didn't last long, and the average rate of charge being just under 32 kilowatts over the 35 minutes that we stayed. We did get ourselves back up to 40% charge, and we set off for the last hour or so north. Fairly quickly, I realised that squeaky bum time was setting in. So I started driving a little bit slower. I started trying to slipstream behind anything we came across. Nightmare was our junction that we take to get home, which is the shortest route from the south, was closed on the Sunday night. So we added a few more miles on, and we were hovering around 5 to 10 miles range left after what I'd worked out after we got home. And I guess this was fine, but as we got closer, the range was being eaten up more quickly than the miles driven. So I started making alternative plans. So first, heating off, slow down that bit more to 60-ish, and think through when we would make different decisions to not go all the way home, but to stop for a charger. I was conscious that my workplace had a charge point with about 2 miles to go, 2 miles left to go before we got home, and that could have been a help. There was also a service station with about 5 or 6 miles before home. But as we got to the charger at work, The car said it had plenty range left with 8 whole miles left. No problem. We do live at the top of a hill on the edge of Durham, and as we got to that hill, the range dropped quite quickly. First of all, a couple of more miles, and then it just disappeared completely and became a flashing dash. Nothing left. And this is kind of panic time. We're there praying, we're there holding our breath, we're driving carefully, just thinking if we could just get up the hill, surely we'd make it. And we did. I don't want to over dramatize things, and who knows how much further we would have gone if we'd have kept driving, but the computer said we had 2% left when we arrived at home. I guess if it's really 2% and the full range was 150 miles, then we were 3 miles from coming to a complete halt. I guess we nailed it. That was perfection, wasn't it? Maybe not. At home, I could plug into a 3-pin charger to add a few miles at our cheap rate before we slumped into bed. And then the next morning, I could plug in at work. So yeah, arriving with 2% wasn't a problem. I did feel a bit thick because we could have stayed for 5 more minutes at Wetherby for much less stress, which really would have been a few more pages of the books that we were reading. So maybe next time this is exactly what I do. Get it to 50% rather than just trying to leave with just enough at 40%. But I guess a few lessons learned for us about the range displayed on the car. I don't think that we were experiencing range anxiety, but more range reality. And you know what? It worked out fine. And it would have been fine if we'd had to stop for 5 minutes at Boburn Services or at a work car park. But maybe we should try to have more in the bag, particularly on a cold, windy night in February. Okay, so the trip overall, we travelled 563 miles, apparently at an average efficiency of 3.4 miles per kilowatt hour and an average speed of just under 50 miles an hour. We started off with a full battery, so let's assume we had 55 kilowatt hours of charge. We added 133 kilowatt hours whilst out and about at rapid chargers, at service stations or in Bristol, and we got back to more or less an empty battery. So 563 miles using 188 kilowatt hours is actually just under 3 miles per kilowatt hour. I'm not sure why the onboard computer is saying more. I mean, that would have given us a motorway range of about 165 miles, which is probably more like what we experienced than definitely more like what we experienced than the 230 that it said at the start. To charge out and about, we spent £99.75. A full tank charged at home would be around another £5, so £105 for 560 miles, or around 18.6 pence per mile. Driving in our old petrol car would have been around 16 pence per mile, so a bit more expensive to drive electric using public charging. If we'd been able to charge at our friend's house, let's say at 25 pence per kilowatt hour, our journey might have been £25 cheaper. Using chargers owned by a private provider is a rare and expensive way to get around, and that's not what we do normally. So what about emissions, CO2 emissions? Moving to an electric vehicle is all about reducing CO2 emissions, as well as reducing the impact on the local poor air quality wherever we drive. In our old petrol car, we were getting around 45 miles per gallon. At that fuel efficiency, our journey would have emitted 117 kilograms of CO2. In the EV, assuming the grid average that we use in emissions reporting, we'd have emitted around 39 kilograms of CO2, so 67% less. It was a windy weekend, so the grid may well have been below average emissions, but whatever it was, about a 2/3 reduction is a great result, and that's why we've gone electric. On top of that, we didn't contribute to poor air quality in Bristol city centre on our way to see our friends. I think I probably should add as well that it's great to drive on the motorway in a more modern car with assisted cruise control, with blind spot warnings, with heated seats and steering wheel, with Apple CarPlay, and the electric car being a much smoother, quieter experience what we used to, with really quick acceleration when you need it. And for me, this is a massive step forward in enjoying driving compared to our old petrol car. You know what? Quite a fun experience. That's one thing about this net zero stuff, is it could make our lives better. Okay, so I think I've got 6 lessons after our first big trip in our second-hand electric vehicle. First of all, the range is not what it says it is, particularly on a cold, windy motorway trip. Secondly, CHAdeMO, the Nissan charge connection, the provision for CHAdeMO is limited, and sometimes it's not available, except obviously at Weatherby services, which is a dream. But elsewhere, that might mean that we struggle to get quick fills or have to wait to fill up, which could be frustrating. A third lesson is that Weatherby is likely to be a frequent stop for us, both north and southbound. It's not a perfect location because it isn't too far from home, about 65 miles or an hour and a quarter. But if we could get there using about a third of our range and top up for 30 minutes, we could get maybe another 40, 50 miles pretty quickly. And that would therefore get us to most places that we want to go when we're heading south, or get us home if we needed to. Lesson 4, making a plan and being flexible is really important. And fortunately, there are actually a wide range of chargers that we can get to all along the way, pretty much across the UK. Number 5, long distance drives may be a bit slower than what we're used to. And my sixth lesson, is that all this is absolutely fine. And it's not too much of a challenge for new electric vehicle owners. There might be a slight change in mindset, but nothing most people wouldn't be able to overcome. So that's it. We got to Bristol and back in a second-hand electric vehicle on a cold, windy February night. We used chargers out and about, and we experienced some range reality. It may have cost us a little bit more, but we're pleased to have taken that a much lower emissions trip than in our old petrol car. Anyway, I'm loving electric life. Do let me know if you've got any recommendations or advice about driving long distances in the winter, and let me know if there's anywhere as good as Weatherby for CHAdeMO charging. Being part of a few Facebook groups and forums and looking at things on YouTube, you do see that people are talking about getting an adapter for the CCS chargers to CHAdeMO. I think I saw the price being around £600-700, which seems like a lot and doesn't seem like something that I'm going to invest in the short term. Maybe more on that another time.